Okay, so today I'm going to be doing my monthly wrap for the month of May, talking all the books that I read in the month of May. Now, May was a special month for me because it was the month that was celebrating my birthday, and because of this, if you did not see my TBR for May, I just want to give you a heads up that I did read an entire series this month. So there were some other books that I read before and after that series, but I just want to warn you for when we do get to that point. But as always, I love stats, so let's take a look at my monthly stats, putting them up on the screen in 3, 2, 1, go. In the month of May, I read a total of 12 books comprising of 8 fantasy, 1 memoir, 1 classic, and 2 LGBTIQ+ books. For my age groups, I read 6 YA, 3 adult, and 3 middle grades. For my lengths, I was very even here. 5 tomes, 4 half tomes, and 3 novellas, totaling around 4,954 pages. And if someone had told me that this was going to be my total for the month, best believe I would have done everything in my power to read another 56 pages of another book. But anyway, over to my star ratings, and I have 7 5 stars, 3 4 stars, and 2 3 stars, which is pretty good, actually. It's been a while since I've had a 1 star, and I can say as well that I did not DNF any books this month. Every single book that I picked up this month I got through, so I'm happy about that as well. Anyway, let's get right on in to those books that I read in the month of May. Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. This is an adult memoir. Honestly, I found this book to be really amazing. Generally speaking, with me and memoirs, they can be rather hit and miss. I don't know what I'm going to get, and so I always go into memoirs with a little bit of anxiety, but for the most part, I really enjoyed this book. If I were to give this book one con, it would just be the long stretched out ending. I felt that this book kind of wrapped up, or should have wrapped up a lot earlier than it did. I felt that it just kind of went on and on and on and on at the end, and it didn't need to. One caution that I will say to anyone who's planning on reading this book, and that is the pray aspect. If you're someone who doesn't like reading about anything to do with spirituality or anything like that, then please do keep in mind, obviously it's in the title, it is going to be included. But otherwise, I had a lot of fun with this book because of the stretched out ending, and that really did annoy me. I couldn't give it 5 stars, so I ended up giving it 4 stars, but I really loved it and I do highly recommend it. The next book that I read in the month of May 2021 was my Brandon Sanderson Cosmere book, and that was the novella Edge Dancer by Brandon Sanderson. So this is marketed as an adult fantasy book, and I have a lot of issues with that. Anyway, I have done a review, a spoiler-free review for this one, and I've done a spoiler and spoiler-free review for this one, so I'll leave them in the description so you can check them out. But this book does not read as an adult anything. In fact, it doesn't even in my mind read as a YA. To me, this book reads as a middle grade, so I don't know who decided to market this as an adult book. It just does not make sense to me. I think had it been marketed as a middle grade, I would have enjoyed it a heck of a lot more, because when I know my age ratings, I go in with some expectations as to things that I, am prepared might come up in the book, things that might happen. But this being marketed as an adult book, there was nothing that was mature, in my opinion, that occurred in this book at all. I ended up giving this book 3 stars based mainly on the age rating and the fact that I completely disagree with it, but I thought on the whole, overall, that it was okay. And now we're going to move on to the series that I completed in the month of May, the Harry Potter series. I read all 7 original works, so I'm just going to quickly talk about my thoughts and feelings on them. I have already done, for some of them, spoiler-free and spoiler, for others, spoiler-free reviews for every single book that I'm about to talk about in this series, so I will link them below so you can check them out for yourself. First up, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or if you're American, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, although my edition is Philosopher's Stone. I love this book. Every single time I read this book, except for obviously the first time, is filled me with so much nostalgia. And that was the exact same feelings that I had going into this book and coming out of it this year. I definitely think that the book is much better than the film. I had a lot of fun reading this, and I end up giving book 1 5 stars. Book number 2, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Now, this is not my favourite film adaptation, for sure, but the book is pretty okay. I do think that the book does deserve 5 stars, and so I did give it as much, but if I were to compare this book to other books in the series, it's probably one of my more lower ranked of the books, but it still, again, deserves those 5 stars. Book 3 in the series, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, has been for the longest time my favourite book in the entire series, because it deals with a trope that I absolutely love, which is going back in time. We learn so much more in this book than we have up to this point that ends up being really crucial information for the remainder of the series. I loved my reread of this book, and honestly I could reread this one many times. It is still one of my absolute favourite books in the entire series, and I gave it 5 stars. Book number 4 in the series is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and up until reading it again last year, I had not read this book for a very long time because of the film adaptation. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire film is incredibly disappointing. In fact, I have said in a number of videos that the only thing that I love about Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire is the fact that the protagonist actor, Daniel Radcliffe, has long hair in the film. And if that's the only thing that you're going to like about a film adaptation, it speaks very highly about the fact that you really don't like this film adaptation. So I kind of took it out on the book. The film does a great disservice. The book is amazing, and I walked away feeling exactly the same again this year. I gave this book 5 stars. Book number 5 is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and last year I was very surprised with this book. It had been quite a while since I'd read this book, but there is just so much that happens in this book. Oh my goodness. If you wrote down every single time a new thing came up, I would be pretty certain there'll be at least 20 different things that you will find out that went on in this book, and it makes for an absolutely insane journey, but I love it even more. I loved it last year, and I love it again this year. Look out for an amazing antagonist slash villain by the name of Dolores Umbridge. I gave this book 5 stars. Book number 6 is Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, and last year this was the most disappointing book for me in the series, and this year it was exactly the same again. There's not really a lot I can say without giving away too many spoilers, but what I can say is the reason why I'm so disappointed with Half-Blood Prince compared to the rest of the series, which up to this point have all received 5 stars, is because this book is more setting us up for the final book in the series rather than being a great book standing on its own 2 feet. But also I feel that this book is more of a look at the life of our main villain. I just really didn't appreciate that. I'm not someone who appreciates history that much, and so I didn't like it the first time I read it, and I still really don't like it that much, but it does hold some very integral information that is needed before we get on to the final book. Ultimately, I ended up giving this book 4 stars. The series wraps up with book number 7, which is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I love this book so much, but I need to be very specific with what I mean by the fact that I love this book. I do not love the first half of the book, and the reason why I don't love the first half of the book is because it deals with my least favourite trope, which is the travelling slash questing trope where you don't know where you're going and you don't know how you're going to get there, and so you're kind of bumbling around, stumbling around, trying to find wherever it is that you're meant to be going, having no idea where it is, so you're kind of heedlessly heading in some kind of a direction. I did not appreciate that. In saying that, the second half of the book more than makes up for it. The second half of this book is arguably one of the best second halves of a book that I've ever read. In fact, I would go as far to say that Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows contains my favourite chapter that I've ever read, which is called The Prince's Tale. I absolutely loved this book. I love it every time I read it. It was just so much fun, and I gave this book an overwhelming 5 stars. Moving on from the Harry Potter series, it's now time to talk about something different. And my classic book that I read for the month of May was this book, The Wizard of Oz by Frank L. Baum. I have seen the film adaptation, but I've never read the actual classic before, and I'm so happy that I got to read this book this month because it was so good. In fact, if anything, the fact that I love the film and that it's such a classic film really inspired me to read the book. Once I finished reading this book, I found myself to be particularly disappointed with the film adaptation because there are so many things that the film does not include from the original works that I feel that they could had the film not been turned into a musical. But the film decided to be a musical. I don't really understand that because there are no songs in the original book, so that doesn't really make sense once you read the original works. But also, the film kind of ends in the Emerald City, which is where the Wizard of Oz lives. The book doesn't. Once something happens, which I don't want to give away because it's a spoiler, Dorothy and her friends and Toto actually leave Emerald City and they go somewhere else. And I'm not talking about them going to visit the Wicked Witch of the West. There are a lot of differences between the book and the film, and I appreciate the book so much more, which says a lot because I always loved the film. I gave this book an overwhelming 5 stars. The next book that I read is a book that I actually borrowed from a library, and it is called The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. So what ended up happening was, I think somewhere about halfway through the month, I ended up going to a friend's place, and while I was there, anytime I leave the house, I like to go and see something to do with books. They don't have a bookstore in my friend's area, but they do have a library. So I went to the library to see if I could find a book that I might like, despite the fact that I was only halfway through this month's TBR. This ended up being a little bit of an issue, and I'll explain why. Ultimately, I ended up signing up to the library where my friend lives and borrowing this book and bringing it back home with me. But the problem was that I wasn't even halfway through the books on my original May TBR, so what ended up happening was I kind of shelved this book so that I could get through and prioritize with the books that were already on my TBR. Fortunately, I got through all of those, including The Wizard of Oz, and I still had time. So I went back to this book and I absolutely loved it. Now, for those of you wondering the genre of this book, it's kind of hard to pinpoint what that is, but I'm going to give it a go and call it a YA historical fiction LGBTIQ+. Yes, that is quite a mouthful to say without taking a breath. We are following a male protagonist who comes across as bi in the book, so that does technically make it an LGBTIQ plus book, but it's also set way back in history, which makes it a historical fiction. Now, I'm not necessarily a fan of historical fiction. I love this book mainly for the characters though, rather than the plot, which is really interesting because I am a plot-driven reader and not a character-driven reader. The plot itself really wasn't what I was expecting it to be, and all I can say without giving too much away is that we're following our protagonist, his best friend who he has a secret crush on, and his sister as they go for a bit of a trip around the world so they can learn more in like a gap year or something like that anyway. And while they're there, things happen, and so they end up going on a massive quest and a massive journey. Look, for the most part, I didn't enjoy the questing journey side of things, but I love these characters so much. So I ended up compromising and giving this book 3 stars because the characters are just so lovable, but the plot just wasn't for me. However, the way the book ended was so good. The ending was what I wanted to have happen throughout the entire book, and yet it just kind of ends that way rather abruptly, and then the book is over, which was kind of a bit disappointing, and that's another reason why I gave this book 3 stars. However, because it ended that way, I decided to check in and see if The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue is actually part of a series, and it turns out it is. There are 3 main books in the series, but there is also a novella. I'm just going to put it up on the screen right there, and it is called The Gentleman's Guide to Getting Lucky. So I loved this book. Again, this is a YA LGBTIQ+ historical fiction, and this book is what I wanted this book to be. So I just had so much fun with this book. There were a couple of disappointments here or there, but nowhere near enough to ruin the book for me. So ultimately I end up giving this book 4 stars. If you love the characters of this book, I highly recommend reading this one because I just felt that this one really celebrates the characters where this one celebrates the plot. So ultimately, I ended up having a really good month in the month of May, and enjoyed pretty much all of the books that I read. How did your reading month go in the month of May? Let me know in the comments below. Have you read any of these books that I read in May? What did you think of them? If you agree or disagree, sound off below. But in the meantime, that is where I am going to leave it, letting you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah! Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading!